Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a program for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work, both at home and to the ends of the earth. Visit us at globalmissionspodcast.com to find show notes, resources, and previous episodes, or to suggest a particular topic or guest you would like to hear featured on the program. You can also engage with us through Twitter and Facebook. We would love to hear from you. And now, here's your host, Rob Magwood, better known to his friends as Mags.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of our second season. Last year, we presented 28 episodes and had over 13,000 downloads, so we determined to continue this program, and it's great to be back. Over the summer break, our team has been cooperating with a new advisory group, so stay tuned for more information on these growing partnerships. Today we'll be discussing the book Contagious Disciple Making by Paul and David Watson. We'll talk with Paul about what it means to be a disciple, what it means to make disciples, and how all of this relates to global missions. Just before we get to that interview, we'd like to share with you this missions resource.
Are you signed up for the Missio Nexus Mission Leaders Conference for 2016? The conference is in Louisville, Kentucky, September 29th through October 1st. It's a great opportunity to network and learn more about what's going on in global missions today. The Missio Nexus website is also a great place to find resources, information, and updates on global missions. Visit missionexus.org to learn more about this great organization today. And now, here's today's interview.
Well, hi again, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's interview. Our guest is Paul Watson. For those of you that haven't had a chance to meet Paul, he is an MK, or missionary kid, who spent many of his growing up years in Asia. Paul has learned a great deal from and with his father David, with whom he has co-authored the book Contagious Disciple Making. That's the focus of our topic today. Paul himself has now trained many disciple-making teams around the world in the UK and France, in Asia, Malaysia, also in the Middle East, Lebanon, and Egypt, as well as in the United States. He and his wife, Christy, now make their home in the Pacific Northwest, where they are actively promoting and catalyzing disciple-making movements in that area as well. Paul, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Really glad to have this chance to talk with you today. Just before we begin, I want to say this is an excellent book, Contagious Disciple Making. For our listeners, I'm glad to warmly recommend it to you. It's packed with very helpful ideas that will be useful to many different groups. If you're a pastor, if you're on a missions committee or a missions team, whatever you call that in your church, if you are a missionary yourself, there is very helpful information in this. We're going to try and condense some of the key ideas together, and we hope it'll be useful to you in your context. Paul, just before we get to the book, would you just take a minute, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be passionate about missions and disciple making?
Sure. Well, I was born in the United States, and at the young age of 7, God had called my parents to go overseas as missionaries, and so as typical MKs, I got drug along and ended up landing in Hong Kong, and we took a varied route through living overseas, Hong Kong, Malaysia, India, and Singapore throughout my childhood. I ended up graduating from the Singapore American School back in '96, and came back to the U.S. to attend university, where I met my wife, Christy. We actually celebrate our 18th wedding anniversary this coming August 15th, and we have 3 kids, a 14-year-old girl, an 11-year-old son, and a 5-year-old girl, along with our 5 chickens and a dog. So that's kind of the vital statistics on it. But in terms of my love and passion for disciple making, having grown up in that environment, I got to see a lot of different kind of evangelism strategies. I got to participate in many of them. I got to participate in many of the things that we call disciple making these days. And I saw them work in some instances, but in many instances I did not. I had friends overseas that would never come to a church, no matter how many times I asked. I had friends who, if in cultures where if I knocked on a door and tried to do a gospel presentation, they'd look at me like I was crazy. And it had nothing to do with craziness over the gospel, but instead craziness that the methodology I was using was violating the cultural norms. And so what I began to do or wrestle with was, how do I how do we, and I got to see my dad wrestle through this, is how do we still be obedient to what God has called us to do without raising so many cultural barriers that someone has to hurdle in order to come to know Jesus? And so that's where we started thinking about making disciples and things like that. And in the Pacific Northwest where I am, it's not that people don't have access to a church, and it's not that the churches are bad. In fact, there's some incredible churches here. Many of the churches are very, very good. It's just that in many, many people's lives, it would never occur to them to go to church in order to find the answers to their spiritual questions or to solve their physical problems. And so I just got into disciple making, kind of the way that we talk about it, with the idea of how do we go and how do we engage those people? How do we do it in an intentional, meaningful way to help them become followers of Christ and in turn be able to transform their communities and to raise up other followers of Christ as well. And so that's kind of where I got into it. It was just a lot of try and fail, really. But we have a statement that you have to be willing to fail forward to be a good disciple maker. And we've experienced a lot of failure, and most of what I share is born out of the hard lessons that we learned in trying different things, and we're committed to trying even more things so that all would hear and all would have an opportunity to respond and that God would receive glory.
Mm-hmm. Well, for those who are regular listeners to the podcast, you'll know that we try and balance global missions with missions right where we are, at home and abroad, both and. And this is one of those episodes that I really sense will be helpful in this way, that it will be relevant. Paul, you're talking about the Pacific Northwest, if I can call that our home culture. It's useful. These ideas are useful to our churches right here at home. And it's also very healthy and helpful in cross-cultural environments when we think more of the classical definition of global missions. So looking forward to this. Paul, discipleship, making disciples, it's a term that is often used in church circles and in missions circles. It's a good term. It's at the heart of the Great Commission, go and make disciples. I'm not certain, however, that we're always working with the same definition. So as we begin, let's start with a definition. What do you mean when you use the term disciple?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. Just very simply for me, I want a disciple is someone who loves the Lord deeply, and because of their love for Him, they seek to obey all of His commands and transform their families and their community and their nation. So the motivation for obedience of God's word does not come because of external pressures or a feeling of a need to earn their way into heaven or to earn the approval of anyone, but instead it comes from, man, God gave me this word and He loves me and I love Him, and this is what He tells me I do to make Him happy, and I want to do this. I want to do this in my life. I want to do it in my family. I want to do it in my community because I believe that doing what God says and following Him means that people's lives will be better both here on this earth and hereafter once we see Him in eternity.
Mm-hmm. You've brought out one of the clear themes of the book, and that is obedience, clearly understanding what Scripture tells us Jesus asks of us, and then moving very deliberately to obey. It's a main theme.
Absolutely, it's a main theme because if you do not obey Scripture, I would go as far to say that you are not a follower of Christ and you are not His disciple. And I don't say that; those are not my words; those are Jesus's words in John chapter 14 and 15.
Mm-hmm. So we've got an idea of a disciple, someone who loves the Lord, intends to obey as best they can, realizing we're not perfect. We understand that we're on a journey together. Give us a brief view of another step here, the mindset of a disciple maker, someone who wants to see more disciples made. What are some of the key characteristics of such a person?
Yeah, and this is probably not in the book because it's stuff we've learned later, but I kind of have broken it down recently into three areas: the advocacy, generosity, and love. That a disciple maker is someone who sees themselves as an advocate for the community in which God has planted them, both to other believers who are in the community, believers outside the community, the secular world at large, and before the throne of God. And we see that in the Bible in terms of how Nehemiah related to the king and the role that he played in the restoration of Jerusalem. We see a lot of those kind of things. So that's part of it. Generosity is understanding that we have to be generous with our love, generous with our time, generous with sometimes our finances, even though I don't think that plays as high of a role as sometimes it gets attention. But that generosity is what it takes to overcome great evil. And we have a lot of great evil in this world, and it's the combined generosity of God's people that can help us to overcome that, to speak out against it. Things like human trafficking, things like hunger, things like homelessness, and even things like your neighbor and their desperation for meaning in life and those kind of things. So those are all elements of that. So advocacy, generosity, and finally love. There's a lot of organizations that will take care of the social needs of people, but for whatever reason hold back from sharing the love of Christ or being very intentional in sharing the love of Christ. And I ran a homeless shelter and recovery center in Portland for 3.5 years. About 200 people a day crossed our door. In the last year I was there, we fed over 80,000 meals in the course of a year. So I understand social justice and the need for it. Mm-hmm. However, there's a burden for me that if all we do is feed people and clothe them and shelter them and get them clean and sober, but we do not share the love of Christ, that is not love. That love is helping them understand that there's a God who has a purpose for their life, and He loves them. He loved them enough to die for them, to do the most generous act imaginable so that they could be in relationship and restored from a place of dishonor and of shame into a place of honor and of recognition in the next to the throne of God. So mm-hmm. those are the things I would say are in the mindset, is that when I walk down the streets where God has planted me, of any city that He puts me in, I realize that God has already given us the territory. And what I'm asking Him is Lord, you see that homeless person over there? That's my homeless person. How do I help them? What do you want to do in their life? You see that strip club over there? There are women in there who do not understand your purpose, and they're not bad people. They've just been misled by life. And how do we help them fall in love with Jesus? And those kind of things. So that's a very intentional way of walking through the community, that if there's any problems in the community, it's not the other people's problems. It's not the lost people's problems. Instead, they're my problems, because God has set us up in the community to bring peace and presence. And if we don't do that, then we're grossly misunderstanding our role as disciple makers in the world today.
Mm-hmm. You talk about in the book, you talk about some of the differences between religion and authentic spirituality, and just that sometimes it's our Christian culture which gets in the way. People even being repulsed by religion, but being drawn towards spiritual, authentically spiritual men and women. It was just helpful for me to rethink through that too. Which parts of my behavior are actually Christian culture as well, and rethinking some of those pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, in stages of development I found of people is that most people are not aware of the difference between the Bible and their culture. They're just not aware. And then you get people who've stepped into a burgeoning awareness of it, that I have this culture that I may not like all the time, and I've got the Bible, and they're separate. Then the next phase is usually, oh my goodness, I hate that culture. I reject that culture. It is not for me. And they look badly upon it and speak badly of it. And then the final, I think, stage of growth, that's like your teenage years, right? That back a little while ago. But the final stage of growth, which I think is maturity, is to look at our culture and recognize it for what it is, the goods and the bads, and to love where we came from, but understand it is not the requirement in order for someone to be a follower of Christ. Someone does not have to have an ichthus on the back of their car or an I love Jesus bumper sticker in order to deeply love Jesus and to want to transform their community. And so that's the process, is to figure out what is cultural and what is scriptural, and to love and cherish our culture, but understand that the mandate is to reproduce the gospel, to plant the gospel, not to reproduce our culture. I am not interested in helping people become better Americans, regardless of where they live. I'm not interested in helping them become better Canadians or better Texans or Southern Baptists or Methodists or anything like that. I'm interested in helping them follow Jesus within their culture. And as a result, the movement of the gospel will be more powerful because people love Jesus, but they often don't jive with the Christian culture.
Mm-hmm. Well, there, nice transition. As you mentioned the word movement, one of the desirable outcomes of disciple making is that movements begin and that there is a reproductive element to this that happens, if I can say, more naturally than we sometimes see. When you talk about disciple making movements, what do you mean? How do you define this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking the question. And what I would encourage our listeners to do is that whenever they come across an organization that is talking about movement, just to simply ask them what they mean. It's not that any one organization has the corner on the definition of movement. It's that we need to understand what they're referring to so that we can judge them by their own or measure them by their own definition. So all I can share is our definition. I think it's a good one. But I understand my own bias in that we look at a few things when it comes to movement. We look at, of course, people coming to know Jesus and communities of faith being established, and we call those churches. And we understand church as a timeline, that it begins as baby church and may grow into something that we would experience that is more classical in nature. We look at, so we sit there and we look at 100 churches, and I'll talk about why in a moment. We look at generational depth, that the outsider comes in and they start a group that becomes a church that in turn starts another group and another until we hit at least 4 generations. We look at breadth in terms of we don't want that just to happen in one line, but we want that to happen in multiple lines of things. So we call those streams. So it happens in multiple streams have reached 4th generation. Not every stream, but multiple streams. And then finally, we talk about timeline in terms of it being about a 3 to 4 year period. And the goal of all of that is when we looked at those characteristics, the ones that seemed to hit, or the places in which the church had grown to that place where movement was happening like that, it was self-sustaining, which meant it didn't require the outsider to continually invest time and effort in making it happen, but instead the inside leadership of the country could keep it going themselves. And that's one of the other definitions of movement, is if it always requires an outside investment of time, of energy and all of that, then it's probably not movement. It's very, very good, but it's not movement.
Right. So just to clarify, when you say generations, you don't mean necessarily in a particular family, although that might be the case, 4 generations, but you mean that a Christ follower shares Christ and makes a disciple, and God willing, they come to know the Lord. That's 1 generation. So you'd have, 1 generation change, 2 generations there. That spiritual child, if I could say it that way, shares Christ with others. That's a 3rd generation. And that spiritual child shares the gospel. Again, there's a 4th generation. That's what you mean by generations.
That's close. I would say that the Christ follower that was the outsider is not counted in that number.
Fair.
Only the insiders. So that the first person or group of people that came to know Christ, because we always try to focus on groups, whether they're families or affinity groups, that first group that comes to know Christ, that's 1st generation, and then it goes from there.
Very good. So there's the depth, if you will, through the generations. Then you said breadth. You don't want it just through one Christ follower, but a multiplication effect. And then you had a time frame on it. Very interesting too. That in a relatively short period of years, 3 to 5 years. You said 3 to 4, I think. Yeah,
and so understand this, that it's not about being rapid in nature. We definitely don't want to sacrifice quality for rapid nature. In fact, sometimes it takes 10 years to get to the point where we do see movement following the definition there. So it's not the sum total of all ministry. It happens in that 3 to 4 year period. But what it does is when we look at a 3 to 4 year period, we should see every 3 to 4 years, we should see at least 100 new churches that have hit at least 4 generations and multiple streams over and over and over again. The other nice thing about having a timeline on that too is that if we go to an area and all of a sudden we see it plateau, and we don't see the new church growth, then we can go, okay, what's the problem? For example, in Africa, there was one area in which we saw that happen. And we began to ask the question, what is the deal? We went in and we found out that we had done a lot of training, which is knowledge transfer, to high capacity leaders. But we had not done any coaching and mentoring, which helps raise the capacity of the internal leaders. So what ended up happening is they hit their capacity and they plateaued. And so when we went in with coaching and we went in with mentoring and with love and more relationship with the internal leaders, the indigenous leaders of the population, then all of a sudden God, as they obeyed God and as they learned new things, their capacity increased and we saw movement happen again. So the 3 to 4 year period is a sliding scale that is important for telling us when movement begins, but also an important tool for telling us when it plateaus or ends as well.
I appreciate that this honors some of the classical efforts at ministry, for example, colleges and seminaries, for example, where leaders are trained. We're not saying that knowledge is unimportant, but that it's just an incomplete, it's by itself, it's not necessarily going to set the stage for something to be reproducing. In fact, it can get in the way.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. It's fascinating to me how our historical approaches to training people in seminaries and Bible colleges shifted, and unfortunately that has slowed down the spread of the gospel. And it's not anyone's fault. It was a pure desire, I believe. But what happened is that back in the day you had people who took responsibility because of the call of God in their life over a community of believers, a church. And they began to serve, and then they hit their capacity. And the church looked at them and said, we want you to be so much more effective. And so the church commissioned them to go to a Bible college or to a seminary with the understanding they would come back to that church and be able to serve them better as a result of the information and mentoring and experience they had gotten. But what ended up happening is that historically we shifted, and now the knowledge given by seminary is given as a prerequisite to being a part of a church. And consequently, they don't have the experience in which to hang what they learn, and it gives it a problem. And it also slows down leadership development. So in movement, we believe very strongly in knowledge, but we believe that we want you to have just enough knowledge at each stage of your leadership, of what God has called you to do, that allows you to do it well, and then equips you for the next stage or phase. And we don't have those in a spreadsheet. This is level 1, level 2. That's a little ridiculous. But there are times when you go, okay, this guy, man, he's becoming a national leader. He needs seminary. He needs Bible college. He needs to have that iron sharpens iron experience. And so in our case, we might have 10,000 leaders, anywhere from leading, one group to leading, 100 group or more. And then we might have 4 or 5 of those that are national leaders that are responsible for training hundreds of people. And then they would be the ones who would go to a seminary or Bible college, and they would find a lot of value from that experience.
Well, you can see how this book stirs up ideas. And here I wondered as I was reading it, Paul, whether one of your desired outcomes was to graciously challenge some of our mindsets, maybe knowing those beliefs that we hold knowingly or unwittingly. We want to help advance God's purposes, but you stirred the pot on a bunch of different ideas. I'm going to try and do something now. That's the first part of the book. The second part of the book is focused on some practices. And through time and experience, David and Paul have identified certain practices that help set the stage for a movement to take place. And there is just no way that we can adequately explore all of those today. I'd like to just read through them, though, quick, Paul, and then I'm going to ask you to dive deep into one of them with me.
Sure.
So just to give the listeners an idea, one of the building blocks is being disciples who make disciples. That's pretty obvious here. There's a chapter on prayer, a chapter on the engagement of lost people, the chapter on finding a person of peace. That's where we're going to dig deeper in a minute. The practice of establishing discovery groups among that unreached people group or community. A chapter on establishing churches, communities of faith-filled people. A chapter on developing leadership. We touched on that already, and also touched on this last chapter on mentoring and coaching and bringing that right down to the ground level into the lives of people. These building blocks, each described in a chapter that I would recommend you go and pick up this book, Amazon or wherever you can pick up this type of book. Let's go back. It's chapter 14, actually, Paul. I'd like to ask you to talk with me about finding a person of peace. That expression we've started to hear a little more often now in ministry, and would you just unpack that idea a bit with us? We'll use this as whetting the appetite for the others, and then people can go and read the book.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you hit on this. It is the most misunderstood part of disciple-making movements. And so I'm glad that you gave me the opportunity, hopefully, to bring even more clarity than what the book will allow. When you write a book, it's the ideas you had to that point, and that you learn a lot later, especially on how to clarify and communicate. And the person of peace is one of them. There's two pieces of that. First of all, if we're talking about the regular living as a disciple of Christ and working and relating to your neighbors and people you come in contact with at work and when you're playing and hobbies and all that kind of stuff, you don't need a person of peace to do that. That's just part of life, and it will take all my life. I've got a next door neighbor. He's a wonderful man. I know that he's a spiritual person. I do not know the quality or depth of his love and following of Jesus yet, but I go fishing with him and I'll go hunting with him. And the idea there is I'm continuing to build a relationship, and I'm looking for opportunities to disciple him into a relationship with Christ if one is not already there, or to help him have a deeper one if it's there. And I don't need a person of peace to do that because he's my neighbor. He's living right next door. The person of peace is there when we're looking at going to communities that we're not naturally a part of and that are going to require time and effort and resources in order to engage. I'll give you an example from my life. I love medicine. I love taking care of people. And so one of the things I was looking at one day is a local community college offered a emergency medical technician degree. Those are the folks that drive around in the back of an ambulance. And so I looked at my wife and we talked, and we thought, hey, that would be fun for me to learn something new, and it would be a community of people that I wouldn't be able to engage otherwise, and it would give me credibility with 4 or 5 other communities if I got that certification. So we spent the money. So there's a giving of resources that we couldn't do forever. And we took the time, and the time was, 2 3-hour classes every week, plus some weekends, and probably 20 to 40 hours of study every week. So it was a significant amount of time. But it put me in regular contact for 9 months with people who probably did not know the Lord, the majority of which did not follow Christ. And in that, I could have casual, spiritual, meaningful and spiritual conversations. So went and did that. And in that, I did have many casual ones, several meaningful ones, and 1 or 2 spiritual ones, and kept up a relationship with about 3 of the people in the group for the next 12 months afterwards or so. And then finally it fell away. What I was doing was I went to that community, and as I engaged the community, not only was I learning and becoming a part of it, but I was asking God to say, hey, God, show me what you're doing in this community of people. And have you brought anyone in this community to a point where they are wanting to start the journey of learning who you are and following you, and not just start it for themselves, but help bring their friends and maybe their family along with them? And if you haven't done that among this people yet, then it's my responsibility then to use the limited amount of time and resources you've given me and to stop engaging them for a time and engage somewhere else. And so what I'm looking for in that community is that person of peace. There's another example. I went to a local coffee shop, and there was just a different atmosphere in this coffee shop. It's hard to describe. Spiritually, there was something different. It was very community, very family friendly. And in that coffee shop, there was a gentleman that everyone saw as kind of a wise man.
Mm.
And I knew in my heart in that moment, I said, if anyone is the person of peace, it's this man. And I began a conversation with him. It went casual, it went meaningful. We didn't have opportunity for spiritual. But what that was, that sense, that sign of that person of peace, potential person of peace in that community, was an indicator to me that I need to start going to that coffee shop on a regular basis and invest the time and energy into relationship with that man to a point to where I can identify whether or not he is willing to begin a journey of discovery and follow Jesus.
Mm.
So those are two examples of that. I couldn't do that forever because it's not in my community. It's not my local coffee shop. It's a different one across town. But because there's the potential for a person of peace, it's worth saying, okay, take the limited time, take the limited resources I have, invest them here until God has shown you, yes, this is where I want you to be, or no, I need you to move on. I just wanted you to see some things.
Mm-hmm. Two great examples, and helpfully illustrate, I think, the sense that God is at work, and it's not just upon us as Christ followers, or especially, particularly as missionaries perhaps, to arrive and begin God's work.
Yes.
But rather to join with him, that he's at work, and he's invited us to come along with him.
Yeah, one of the hard things is that a lot of people want to force this thing or manipulate this thing. And I've found that you only have to do that if you're inexperienced or if you're not leaning on the power and the presence of the Holy Spirit and the forework of the Holy Spirit. That when I go into places, I'm not saying, Lord, help me get someone. Help me to manipulate the conversation so that we're talking about you. Instead, I'm going in and saying, Lord, help me see these people that you've created as precious. And help me intersect with their spiritual journey. And hopefully, Lord, give me the great privilege and honor to be able to bring them into a relationship with you and to see them and their family and their friends baptized and to start a church or to grow an existing church that's in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And that's what I do. And I trust him to guide the conversation. And it's hard to describe, but I've just found over and over and over again, he is faithful. When we ask him those questions, we make it aware, when we're willing to see people and not try to sell Jesus, that when we do that, he opens up those opportunities. And because he has arranged the time and the place of the introduction, then it goes so much better than if I try to force something that wasn't intended in his plan.
Right. Well, if we have succeeded in whetting the appetite of some of our listeners, if a church or perhaps an international worker, missionary, wants to learn more about contagious disciple making, how do you recommend they get started? How can they learn more and get going?
Yeah, so Contagious Disciple Making is an organization. It's the organization I started with some friends of mine a year ago this coming August. And we started it to lean into the idea of what does it mean to see movement happen in North America and Canada. But we also learned that there are many missionaries and churches who want to live out these principles in their church and to learn and get experience in the U.S. before they go overseas, or in Canada before they go overseas. And so we also have place for that. And we tell them we do three things: that we are on the journey ourselves, that everything we're teaching other people to do, we're doing it as well and learning from our mistakes. The second is we're inviting people and organizations and churches to come along in the journey together to reach the hardest to reach peoples, both in the U.S. and Canada, and that would help prepare people who might go overseas additionally. And then finally, as we're going, we develop tools and knowledge that helps us. And so we want to make that available to everyone. And so if people go to our website, contagiousdisciplemaking.com, they can find a list of materials and tools that are there. We do a free webinar every month around a specific topic. So last month's was how to become a better trainer, to help those along the journey of becoming a disciple maker. And you just have to go to the website and sign up for it, and you'll get an email with all the things. It's completely free. And if you need to, you can get a recording later. It's for purchase off the site. And if the purchase is prohibitive, just write me an email and I'll send you a code and you can download it free of charge. Our goal is to spread what we're learning, not to make money, obviously.
Sure.
So those are some things that we're doing. And literally, it's from people who are in the trenches who are saying, these are things we're learning. It's trying. This isn't working. This is working. And so it's fluid all the time. And today I'll release a YouTube video that's specifically about casual, meaningful, and spiritual conversations, and that'll be on the site. So there's a lot of things coming out there, basically our journal, if you will, from the battle in the trenches. And that we just want to share what God has given us and hope that it helps someone else along the way. My personal motto in life is that I'm just one beggar telling another where I found food. And so that's what we believe in ministry as well.
Super. Well, very stimulating, very practical stuff. For those who are regular listeners, you already know that we do show notes. If this is the first time you've heard the podcast, we do take notes during an interview like this, and you can find those notes on our website, globalmissionspodcast.com. And we will include all of the links that Paul has mentioned. Any books or websites that he's mentioned, you'll find those links there, easy for you to reference afterwards. Paul, just as we conclude, we want to ask if any of our listeners would like to learn more about Contagious Disciple Making, or to follow you, or to be in contact with you, how can they do that?
Yes, if you send any email through our website, it comes straight through me, so contagiousdisciplemaking.com. Also, if you want to find me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, just search for Paul D. Watson, D as in David. So I'm facebook.com/Paul D. Watson. Send me a note letting me know that you came through this podcast so I can approve you. And I try to live my life pretty openly, and so you'll see that there. And then Instagram, I'm Paul D. Watson. Twitter, I'm Paul D. Watson. And then from those places, you can find the other ones. You can also find Contagious Disciple Making on Facebook, and we do a lot more frequent updates there from all the different sources. And we're also Contagious Disciple Making on Instagram too.
Super. All of those links will be in the show notes. Paul, I want to say on behalf of our listeners, a big thank you to you for taking the time with us today and for stimulating some of these ideas. And we pray that the Lord will continue to bless your work as you serve him there in the Northwest.
Outstanding. Thank you so much.
Well, that's it for today's episode. We hope that you have been blessed. Remember that if you've been driving or riding while listening to the program, or if you missed any of the links or resources, you can find them in the show notes on the website at globalmissionspodcast.com. We also invite you to participate in the conversation with us. You can reach us through the website or the Facebook page or the Twitter feed. We always welcome your encouragement and suggestions for the podcast. That's it for today. The Global Missions Podcast is produced by the Jaffrey Center for Global Initiatives and Send International of Canada in collaboration with other like-minded agencies. On behalf of the team, thanks for listening, and we invite you to join us again in 2 weeks when we'll continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.